We've covered some of the darkest, most twisted cases on this channel. Murders, conspiracies, and unsolved mysteries that chill you to the bone. But sometimes, the most unsettling stories aren't about monsters hiding in the shadows. They're about systems. They're about the moment a simple, childish act collides with an unstoppable, unthinking machine of authority, turning a school classroom into a crime scene, and a teenager into a criminal. This is the story of the farting bandit of Stuart, Florida. A case that sounds like a joke, a headline you'd see on a satirical news site. But for one 13-year-old boy in 2008, it was a terrifying, life-altering reality that saw him arrested, charged, and processed by the criminal justice system for the crime of flatulence. If you're fascinated by true stories that expose the bizarre and often frightening quirks of our legal system, you need to hit that subscribe button. We dig into the cases that are as strange as they are significant, and this one is a textbook example of zero-tolerance policy gone completely off the rails. Our story begins on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday, November 4th, 2008. While the nation was fixated on the historic election of Barack Obama, in the quiet, sun-drenched town of Stuart, Florida, the student body of Spectrum Junior-Senior High School was focused on something far more mundane: another day of classes. Spectrum was what's known as an alternative school, a place for students who, for various reasons, weren't thriving in a traditional academic setting. The atmosphere was meant to be more supportive, more understanding. But on this day, in a computer lab, that theory would be put to the ultimate test. Let's call our main subject Alex. To protect his identity, we won't use his real name. He was 13 years old. A 7th grader. By all accounts, a typical kid, prone to boredom, with a mischievous streak and a sense of humor that was, to put it mildly, immature. He was the kind of kid who found bodily functions inherently funny. And on this day, during a computer lab session, Alex decided to become a one-man comedy show. The air in the lab was likely stale, recycled by the school's AC unit, smelling of dust and warm electronics. The only sounds were the clicking of mice and the gentle hum of computer towers. And then, Alex let one rip. It wasn't just a silent but deadly. This was a declaration. A loud, proud, and deliberate disruption. A wave of giggles swept through the room. The teacher, let's call her Mrs. Davison, likely issued a warning. A stern look. That's enough, Alex. But for Alex, the laughter was a drug. The attention was a reward. And so, he did it again. And again. He was the farting bandit, a gaseous outlaw holding the computer lab hostage with his own digestive system. But Alex wasn't content with just auditory terrorism. Emboldened by his initial success, he escalated his campaign of chaos. As his classmates were trying to focus on their work, he would get up, wander over to their stations, and with a mischievous grin, reach down and flip the power switch on the back of their computer towers. Screens would go black. Unsaved work would vanish. The giggles turned to groans of frustration. This was no longer just a case of bad manners. In the eyes of the school, this was a pattern. This was a deliberate, willful, and escalating disruption. The teacher's patience, understandably, had worn thin. The lesson was in shambles. The learning environment had been, quite literally, poisoned, and so, the machinery of school discipline was set in motion. But this wasn't the 1990s, where a trip to the principal's office meant a lecture and a call home. This was the era of the school-to-prison pipeline. This was the era of zero tolerance. Can you imagine being that teacher? Or being one of the other students trying to get your work done? Let us know in the comments. Where do you draw the line between childish mischief and punishable disruption? The call was made. Not just to the principal's office, but to the one person in the school who represented not just discipline, but the full weight of the law, the School Resource Officer. The School Resource Officer, or SRO, is a fully sworn, armed law enforcement officer whose beat is the school campus. Their role is complex, part counselor, part safety officer, part law enforcer. And on that day, the SRO at Spectrum Junior Senior High was about to become the lead investigator in the case of the disruptive flatulence. The officer entered the scene. The computer lab. The crime scene. He would have taken statements. He would have looked at the evidence, the now off computers, the frustrated teacher, the snickering classmates. He would have sat down with Alex. We don't know the exact conversation, but we can imagine it. A 13-year-old boy, confronted by a uniformed police officer. The officer's duty belt, heavy with a gun, handcuffs, and pepper spray. The stern tone. The questions. Under that kind of pressure, most kids would crack. Alex confessed. He admitted to the farting. He admitted to turning off the computers. He was, in his mind, just being a class clown. He likely had no concept of the legal avalanche he was about to trigger. Because in the state of Florida, there is a specific statute, Florida Statute 877.13, disruption of a school function. It's a second-degree misdemeanor. Let's read what it actually says. Any person who, in a place and at a time when a school function is taking place, commits any act which disrupts the orderly conduct, discipline, or environment of such function, is guilty of a misdemeanor of the second degree. The key words here are any act. It's a deliberately broad net, designed to catch everything from a violent fight to a bomb threat. But on November 4, 2008, in Martin County, Florida, that net was cast to catch something else entirely. A fart. The SRO made the decision. Alex was not given a detention. He was not sent to the principal. He was placed under arrest. Think about that for a second. A 13-year-old was arrested. The language shifts from disciplinary problem to criminal suspect. The context shifts from the school handbook to the penal code. The procedure that followed was identical to the procedure for someone arrested for shoplifting, or vandalism, or public drunkenness. He was likely read his Miranda rights. His hands were secured, not with a piece of string, but with metal handcuffs. He was escorted out of the school, past his staring classmates, and placed in the back of a patrol car. This is the moment the surreal becomes real. The moment a childish prank becomes a mugshot. The moment a 13-year-old boy is processed into the Martin County legal system for the crime of flatulence. He was transported to the Martin County Jail for processing. He was fingerprinted. He was photographed. He was charged officially with that second-degree misdemeanor, disruption of a school function. A charge that, upon conviction, could carry a sentence of up to 60 days in a juvenile detention facility. Finally, after what must have been the most terrifying and confusing hours of his young life, Alex was released into the custody of his mortified and undoubtedly furious mother. But the case was far from over. The charge still stood. He had a court date. He was a criminal defendant. This is where the story explodes out of the Martin County Sheriff's Office and into the national consciousness. What happens when a story this bizarre meets the 24-hour news cycle? Stick around, because the media frenzy that followed was almost as unbelievable as the arrest itself. In the pre-social media age of 2008, news still traveled fast. A local Florida story about a farting arrest? It was a perfect storm for the nascent world of internet news and cable channel chatter. It had everything: a ridiculous premise, a "you've got to be kidding me" factor, and a serious, underlying question about the state of our society. The story was first picked up by The Smoking Gun, a website known for its quirky crime reporting. From there, it went supernova. The New York Daily News ran with it. NBC News featured it on their national broadcast. It became a headline on every local news station across the country. the kind of, and finally, story that anchors read with a smirk. The public reaction was immediate and merciless. Talk radio hosts had a field day. Late-night comedians wrote monologue jokes. "I guess that's one way to clear a room," Jay Leno probably quipped. The internet, then in its relative youth, birthed its first memes. Alex was dubbed the farting bandit, the tootin' troublemaker, the methane menace. But beneath the jokes, a serious debate was raging. Was this a case of a school and a police department completely overstepping? Or was it a justified response to a student who was willfully and repeatedly disrupting the education of others? On one side, you had civil liberties advocates and child psychologists sounding the alarm. They argued that criminalizing childish behavior was a catastrophic failure of judgment. That schools should be equipped to handle discipline internally, without resorting to the nuclear option of arrest. That this was a prime example of the school-to-prison pipeline in action, where minor infractions funnel kids, especially those in alternative schools, into the justice system, setting them on a path they may never escape. Dr. Amelia Vance, of the Center for Adolescent Health and the Law, would later state in interviews, "We're seeing a criminalization of typical adolescent behavior. The role of schools is to educate and socialize, not to act as an extension of the police state for every act of mischief." On the other side, you had those who defended the school and the officer. They argued that in a post-Columbine era, schools couldn't be too careful. That zero tolerance meant just that, zero tolerance. That Alex's behavior wasn't a one-off, it was a sustained, escalating act of defiance that included damaging school property, by turning off the computers, and created a hostile learning environment. They argued that the arrest, while extreme, sent a necessary message about consequences. A spokesperson for the Martin County Sheriff's Office stood by the decision, stating, "The deputy acted appropriately based on the situation presented to him. The student's actions were a deliberate and repeated disruption that prevented other students from learning." The case file itself is a study in absurdity. The official police report, a document usually filled with descriptions of assaults, thefts, and traffic violations, contained the phrase "intentionally passed gas." The witness statements were from 13-year-olds describing the sound and smell of their classmates' flatulence. The evidence was, essentially, a bad smell and a series of off-button presses. For Alex and his family, the media circus was a nightmare. Their private shame and their son's humiliation were now national news. He wasn't just a kid who made a mistake, he was a punchline. Every time he walked down the street, every time he went back to school, he was the kid who got arrested for farting. The legal proceedings moved forward. Alex, now with a public defender, appeared in juvenile court. The goal for his defense team was simple: get this ridiculous charge dropped and keep this incident from permanently staining his record. The prosecution was in a difficult position. Did they really want to be the government agency that went to trial against a 13-year-old for farting? Could they, with a straight face, stand before a judge and argue that this case was a valuable use of the court's time and resources? Fortunately, cooler heads prevailed. In the end, the case against Alex was dismissed. He faced no jail time. He was likely required to complete some form of informal probation, maybe community service, and the charge was eventually expunged from his juvenile record. The system, after making a spectacular error in judgment, had quietly corrected its course. But the damage was done. The precedent, in a way, had been set. So, what are the lasting repercussions of a case like this? The answer might surprise you, and it goes far beyond one kid in Florida. The farting bandit case of 2008 became a landmark example, a go-to reference in the ongoing national debate about school discipline. It's cited in academic papers, discussed in school board meetings, and used as a cautionary tale by organizations fighting against the over-policing of schools. The case exposed the fatal flaw in zero tolerance, policies. They remove context, nuance, and humanity from the equation. A fart is treated with the same legal severity as a fistfight. There is no room for a teacher or principal to use their judgment to de-escalate a situation, to teach a lesson about respect and consequences. The only tool in the box is a sledgehammer, the criminal justice system. In the years since, many school districts have begun to reevaluate their relationships with school resource officers and their discipline policies. Moving toward restorative justice, practices that focus on mediation and reconciliation rather than punishment. The story of Alex is often held up as the what not to do model. For Alex himself, now a man in his late 20s, this is likely an embarrassing, cringeworthy story from his past. We can only hope that he was able to move on, that the arrest didn't define him, and that he's living a normal life, far from the spotlight of his gaseous notoriety. The Martin County Sheriff's Office and Spectrum School likely look back on the incident as a massive PR disaster and a learning experience. There have been no similar, high-profile, farting arrests since, suggesting that perhaps the lesson was learned, but the statute in Florida remains unchanged. The legal framework that allowed a 13-year-old to be arrested for flatulence is still on the books, ready to be used again. The next, farting bandit, is out there, sitting in a classroom, completely unaware of the legal minefield they could be stepping into with a single, ill-timed bodily function. This story is more than just a funny headline. It's a stark reminder of what happens when common sense is replaced by blind adherence to policy. It's a warning about the dangers of criminalizing childhood. And it's a testament to the fact that sometimes, the most absurd true crime stories are the ones that reveal the most about the fragile, and often ridiculous, nature of the systems we live under. This case proves that the line between a childhood mistake and a criminal act can be terrifyingly thin. If this story shocked you, or made you think about the world we're building for our kids, share this video. Let's keep this conversation going. Subscribe for more deep dives into the true crime stories that are strange, significant, and sometimes just a little bit smelly. Thanks for watching.